Hello. I'd like to thank you for making the choice to join us here at the Greenbrier Church Online. A few weeks ago, I was reading a blog from a woman who is in the process of raising four children. Her oldest daughter approached her and asked for a toy that she had seen on television. Seeing this as an opportunity to teach her daughter about hard work and how you earn money, she told her daughter that if she would help out and do certain jobs around the house, she could earn enough money to buy the toy. So the 6 year old started to help around the house. After dinner, she would help clean up the table. She would pick up her toys and the toys of her brother and sisters. She helped sweep out the garage. She would do all of these little bitty jobs around the house in an effort to save enough money so that she could buy her own toy. Well, after a few weeks, she had enough money to buy the toy, and she and her mom headed off to Target. The little girl skipped her way through the store, got down to the toy aisle, found the toy that she wanted, where she then took it to the cash register, and the cashier rang up the toy and told the little girl how much money she owed. The little girl looked at her mom and said, "That's all the money I have." And the mom replied, "Yeah, baby, this is how much it costs. But remember, you've earned that much money working around the house. If you want the toy, then you need to give this nice lady all of your money." Rather reluctantly, the little girl emptied out her wallet and she gave all of the money she had worked so hard to earn to the cashier. But she was happy that she got her toy. She was able to take it home. The woman continues to write that after a few days of playing with that toy, her little 6 year old daughter came to the kitchen crying, and her mom asked what was going on. And the little girl said, "Mommy, I really miss my money." The woman said that she had hoped to teach her daughter about the value of hard work, but it seems that what her daughter really learned was the allure of the almighty dollar. I really appreciate this mom telling her story because it serves as a reminder of how our possessions, our money, our stuff can really grab a hold of us. Money is supposed to be neutral, and yet every one of us know the power that it holds in our world. We live in a consumer culture. It seems like every week there's another new and shiny appliance or toy or gadget that just screams out for, that demands our attention. We live in a culture that's never satisfied. We feel like we never have enough. We've never accumulated enough. So, as we begin the final chapter of James, I really hope that it doesn't come as a surprise to you that he's going to address the problem of money and how it competes with our affection for God. James is talking to us, to you and me, and I know that it's really easy to bypass what he's saying in this part of the letter because he addresses rich people. And I mean, honestly, I'm not rich, right? I mean, a rich person has so much more than I have. A rich person can take trips that I could never afford to take. A rich person can buy a house that's much bigger than the house that I own. Or a rich person can drive a car, a nicer car that has all of the options on it, a car that I can't afford. But according to the latest numbers that I could find, three-fourths of the world's population survives on a yearly salary of $270, which means that most of us pay more during the month of July for electricity than the rest of the world makes in a year. So don't excuse yourself from what James is saying in this part of the letter. The principle that he lays out for us is important. If we really want to have the relationship with God that we were created for, then we have to learn how to use our money properly. Whether we have a little or a lot, we have to take God into account about how we use what we have been blessed with. It might come as a surprise to you, but I don't think God is opposed to wealth. There are lots of people in the Bible that were extremely wealthy. Abraham amassed a great deal of wealth and possessions. Job, David, Solomon, they were all the wealthiest men of their time. In the New Testament, Barnabas was wealthy because he's able to give an extravagant gift to the church. Joseph of Arimathea, the man who gave Jesus his tomb to borrow, was extremely wealthy. And the ability to make money by those who generously support the work of the kingdom seems like it's a spiritual gift. So I don't think God is opposed to wealth, But I do believe that he is very much opposed to the misuse and the abuse of wealth. He wants us to use our wealth wisely, no matter how much or how little we have. I also want you to understand that God is not concerned with what you do with the millions of dollars you don't have. And what I mean by that is, I imagine that every one of us at one time or another have thought about what we would do if we just happened to be walking through a parking lot and found a Powerball ticket on the ground because, we're good Christians and we wouldn't buy one. But we pick up that ticket and we notice that we just happened to win $350 million. We imagine how much money would we give to the church? How much money could we give to mission points around the world? And while that sounds all well and good, it doesn't really amount to anything more than empty talk. In reality, I do believe that God is very interested in how you use the $10 that you actually have in your pocket or your wallet. Are you spending your money on things that are really important, on the things that God considers as important? How are you blessing people that God puts into your path? How are you using what you have to give a drink to someone who's thirsty, to give food to someone who's hungry, to give clothes to someone who's in need? In the New Testament times, there was no such thing as the middle class. People are either extremely rich or extremely poor. The system that they're living in causes the rich to constantly get richer and the poor to constantly get poorer. And the rich tended to manipulate and to oppress the poor. The rich people use their wealth and their position to abuse and to take advantage of the poor. And the poor people had no option to get justice. And so God addresses this issue time and time again in the Old Testament through the prophets. The prophet Ezekiel even said that this was the sin of your sister Sodom. They had everything they needed and still refused to help the poor and needy. They thought they were better than everyone else, and they did things I hate. So I destroyed them. James understands that even though money is supposed to be neutral, we tend to give it this immense power in our lives. Oftentimes, we search and we try to find our security in the almighty dollar rather than accepting the security that God offers us through a relationship with Him. Now, remember, James is trying to show us how to apply the teachings of Christ in our lives. And it makes sense that he would address the way that the church and the individual members of that church were using the money that God had allowed them to earn. It seems to me that we're guilty of abusing money and our relationship with money in a few different ways. And while we might not commit all of these sins to the same degree, I think this passage here in James chapter 5 is a healthy warning for us to make sure that no matter how much money we have or we don't have, we use it in a way that brings glory to God. The first thing that James says is that we have to fight our temptation to hoard our wealth. That's verse 3. This corroded treasure you have hoarded will testify against you on the day of judgment. James is reminding us that money is not to be stockpiled just for the sake of having it. God wants us to use the money we have as an avenue to love and to bless and to take care of one another. Now, I don't think that James is saying we can't have a savings account. There's a legitimate place for savings. I mean, in Proverbs chapter 6, there's these principles that saving money demonstrates good stewardship of the resources that God gives us. But what often happens is that we take on the attitude that's been attributed to John D. Rockefeller. The story is one day somebody asked John D. Rockefeller how much money is enough money, and his reply was just $1 more. Now, every now and then, we'll hear this story about somebody who was an elderly person who passed away. They lived their years in absolute poverty. They didn't have electricity in their homes. Their home was in desperate need of repair. The roof is sagging in. The walls are bowed. And after they pass away, people go in to clean up their homes. And they tell the story that when they moved a mattress or moved a couch, they discovered hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, this isn't somebody that saved their money. This is somebody who hoarded their money. They were afraid of losing their money, so they didn't spend any of it. Money had become an end to itself. Accumulating money had become the goal of their life. They were so afraid of losing money, they refused to spend it. People in the first century showed off their wealth and their affluence by stockpiling food and clothes and precious metals and jewels. James speaks about three types of wealth in verses 2 and 3. Your wealth is rotting away, and your fine clothes are moth eaten rags. Your gold and silver are corroded. Basically, he says everything you've collected, it's ruined. Do you have food in your refrigerator that's spoiled? I don't know. Maybe in this thought that you were going to start eating more healthy, you bought a bag of salad, or maybe there's a bowl of what might be spaghetti, and we've put it in the refrigerator and we pushed it to the back and we forgot all about it. Do you know what kind of food rots? It's not the food that you eat. It's the stuff in the back of the refrigerator that's been there for weeks and months and we've forgotten about it. But we've never thrown it away because we like the fact that our refrigerator looks full, and yet the food that we have rots. James says that your clothes are moth eaten. Do you know what kind of clothes get moth eaten? Is it the jacket that you wear all the time, or the clothes that you have pushed to the back of your closet, clothes that you haven't even tried on in the last 6 months, or, let's be honest, 6 years? Those clothes that you hoard, clothes that you will never fit into again, but you just can't bring yourself to give them away so that somebody who desperately needs clothes will have something to wear. James is making the point that whatever we accumulate will eventually deteriorate. God doesn't want us to gather wealth just for the sake of gathering wealth. He wants us to put what we have in circulation. Wealth is to be used, not hoarded. Do you remember the man in Luke chapter 12 who had a very successful harvesting season? He harvested this huge crop and he said, I know what I'll do. I'll go out and I'll build bigger barns. And he never thought about giving any of it away. He never thought about using that harvest to help others, to keep it in circulation. He has this selfish view of the harvest. He says, I'm going to hoard it. Do you remember how the story ends? God comes to him at night and says that this night your life is required of you. Now, who gets to take possession of everything you accumulated? The second issue that James talks about is how we get our wealth. In the New Testament, most of the people are daily laborers, which means that every morning they would get up and they would go hang out in the marketplace and they would just kind of stand around there. And if you were lucky, somebody would come and offer you the opportunity to go work in their fields or their vineyards. At the end of the day, they would gather everybody up and they would pay them their daily wage. Now, the daily worker is at the mercy of the one who's hiring them to work. There are no contracts. There are no labor unions. And I know the Old Testament has laws and rules put in place to protect the daily laborers, but those laws were often overlooked or just outright ignored. It was a common practice of the rich to take advantage of the poor. If a landowner wanted to rip you off, all he would do is have you to come out and to work in his field. And after you worked in the sun and the heat all day, he would just come out and say, you didn't do a good enough job. You didn't work hard enough. I'm not satisfied. And he sent you home without paying you. You had no recourse. You labored all day. You received absolutely nothing. This is what James is criticizing in verse 4 when he writes, hear the cries of the field workers whom you have cheated of their pay. The cries of those who harvest your fields have reached the ears of the Lord of heaven's armies. We're supposed to be different from the world. There are lots of different ways that we can make money dishonestly. I mean, one of the ways is just to simply not pay your debts. But that's not the only thing James is telling us. Because we're reading the passage today, we need to be honest in all of our business dealings. So For instance, if I sell a car, a used car, and I hide the fact that it's going to need some major repairs, I'm taking advantage of someone. When I choose to scroll through social media or to slack off while I'm being paid to do a job, I'm stealing from my employer. If you go to Walmart and you buy something, you use it, and then you return it when it served its purpose, you're being dishonest. If you cheat on a tax report or an expense report, you have chosen the almighty dollar over the almighty creator. In the end, we're no different than the unscrupulous employer. Thirdly, James says that we need to be careful how we spend our money. The way that we spend our money is really important. James says that we choose to waste our money and the opportunity that we had to serve the kingdom of God. That's what he says in verse 5. You have spent your years on earth in luxury, satisfying your every desire. You have fattened yourself for the day of slaughter. I think one of the greatest temptations that we have with money is the temptation to spend it selfishly on ourselves. The more money that you make, the easier it is to waste it. I'm not immune. We all tend to say things like, I need to treat myself for this. I'm worth it. I can afford it, so why shouldn't I buy it? And the truth is, just because I can afford it doesn't mean that I need to afford it. James tells us not to waste our money. And that's really easy to do, especially if you've got an abundance of it. I think back to when I first graduated college and I got my first job. I'm out living on my own for the first time. I have a car. It wasn't a new car, but it was paid for. The car ran, it had a heater. My first place to live by myself was in a little bitty apartment. It wasn't the nicest apartment in the nicest complex with all of those amenities. We didn't have any amenities. But I did have a roof and water and heat and air. And there was a single bedroom apartment, which was fine because I was living by myself. But when I got my first raise, I was tempted to go out and buy a new car. I was tempted to move into a bigger apartment. And my dad cautioned me that if I spend my raise on bills, then I don't really get a raise. I just take on more debt. I would love to stand here and tell you that I listened to him, but I've never been good with money. I'm still not. That's why this part of the book of James speaks the loudest to me. There was a time that Christmas was the consumer event of the year, that starting in September, merchandisers began to plan how they could get us to spend our money. But now we walk around with our heads buried in our phones, looking at social media all the time, and companies are constantly flooding our eyes with more and more things that we need to have the perfect life. Just this last week, I'm sitting out on the patio of my house, and I'm sitting in a chair, and I've got a fire going in the fire pit, and I'm scrolling through my phone, and I see an ad for the new Ninja fire pit. And immediately I begin to try to figure out, how can I get $500 to buy this new pit? Something that I don't need. There are a million ways to squander your money. James says in the application of wealth, don't waste it. Don't just spend it on things and pleasures that really don't add anything to your life just because you can afford it. Just because you can afford it doesn't mean you need to have it. Finally, James talks about how we use money's influence. Wealth gives us much more than simply buying power. Richard Foster writes that when you have money, it gives you influence and authority. We listen to people who make money more than people who are poor, and that's not always the wisest thing to do. It's not new for people to bribe judges to circumvent justice. It seems that as far back as the first century, the rich are paying off their judges. If they want to take advantage of a guy, they just simply take him to court. Before they get to court, they talk to the judge, they slip him some money, and then everything would go the way that they wanted it to go. We read in verse 6, you have condemned and murdered good and innocent people who have had no power to defend themselves. James is warning us to be careful and not use our money to manipulate other people. And it happens. I know people who have threatened to take people out of their will in an effort to keep all the relatives in line. I've known kids on the playground who've used money and gifts to buy friends and to turn kids against other kids. I've even been in elders' meetings where a member of the church came in and sat down and told the elders, if you don't do what I'm telling you to do, then I'm going to withhold my contribution. That's nothing more than a misuse of what God has allowed us to have. Christians ought to recognize that money has influence, and we ought to use that influence for good. The point that James is making in this passage is that we ought to use our affluence for good. Wealth is a good tool if we use it as a steward for the Lord. But it's also a dangerous trap if we adopt a worldly perspective towards it. I know that money is a touchy subject because the way we use our money tells more about our relationship with Christ than, well, any other aspect of our lives. Nothing reveals the condition of our hearts more than the way that we view money and material possessions. I've heard a lot that if you want to know where a person is spiritually, look at how they spend their money, look at their bank account. And I think today James is reminding us that the one who is inviting us to join him at the table, he's already promised to take care of all of our needs here and to allow us to experience his riches throughout all eternity. So, as we gather to take communion this morning, it's my prayer that the bread and the cup will remind us of the wonderful promises of God and the beautiful relationship that He's invited us to be a part of. I hope that you have a wonderful week, that you never forget how deeply you're loved, and I look forward to seeing you very soon.